I've been a skip tracer since the early 70s, mostly for finance companies and bail bondsmen across the Southwest. I got good at it because I understood the one thing that makes a skip findable. People are creatures of pattern. Even a man trying to disappear keeps reaching for the familiar. He calls his mother. He renews the one magazine subscription he can't live without. He moves to the one city where he knows somebody. You don't find a skip by being clever. You find him by being patient, and by knowing that nobody disappears completely. Because disappearing completely means giving up everyone you've ever loved. And almost nobody can do that. In the fall of 1987, a finance company out of Phoenix put a file on my desk. The subject was a man named Curtis Lambeth, who had financed a 30-foot powerboat. A lot of boat for a man who lived 2 hours from the nearest real water, and then stopped paying and dropped off the earth. The balance was substantial enough that the company wanted a person, not just a phone call. Find Curtis Lambeth, repossess the boat, put a process server in front of him if I could. Routine work. I expected to find him in a month, living under a slightly altered name in some town where he had a cousin, the way they almost always do. But Curtis Lambeth was wrong from the start, and it took me a while to understand why. A real skip is messy. He leaves a trail of small failures, a forwarding order he forgot to cancel, a relative who slips and gives you a city, a bar tab under his real name because old habits die hard, a girlfriend he can't stop calling. I'd built a 15-year career on those small failures. You start with the last good address. You knock on the doors on either side. You find the landlord. You pull his known associates and call every one of them pretending to be something you're not. An old army buddy, a man holding a check, a cousin trying to reach him about a death in the family. Somebody always knows something. Somebody always slips. Curtis left nothing. His mail forwarding led to a vacant lot off a county road, an address that had never had a mailbox on it. His last employer had a termination date and no forwarding information, and when I drove out there, a foreman who got oddly quiet when I said Curtis's name, and then said he'd heard Curtis went out to California, in the tone of a man repeating something he'd been told, rather than something he believed. His apartment had been cleared out completely, not in the half-packed panic of a man running from a debt. Cleanly, thoroughly, the way a place gets emptied by someone with time, and no fear of being interrupted. And his family. This is the detail that first truly bothered me. We're not looking for him. When a man skips on a debt, his family is usually angry or worried, or both. They react. They have opinions. They want to tell you their side. Curtis's sister, when I finally reached her, was neither angry nor worried in any ordinary way. She was vague, frightened, eager to get off the phone. And when I asked the simplest question, "When did you last hear from your brother?" there was a silence on the line. I have heard that silence exactly often enough in this work to recognize it. That is not how the family of a deadbeat sounds. That is how the family of a missing person sounds, when they've been told something they're afraid to repeat. The trail wasn't messy enough. That sounds backward, but it's the truest thing I can tell you about that case. A man covering his own tracks is never that thorough, because he's improvising, and broke, and scared, and fear makes people sloppy in predictable ways. He keeps the one phone number he can't bear to lose. He gets homesick and drives past his mother's house. In 15 years, I had never once met a skip who'd managed a clean break. A clean break requires planning and money and the willingness to become nobody. And the kind of man who skips on a boat loan has none of those things. The cleanness of Curtis Lambeth's disappearance was not the cleanness of a careful skip. It was the cleanness of an erasure, performed by someone else. Someone with time. Someone unafraid of interruption. Someone who didn't have to improvise, because he wasn't running from anything.
I remember the moment it turned over in my head. I was sitting in a diner outside Kingman, the file open next to a plate of eggs going cold, making the list I always make. Every place a man like this would reach for. And I realized I had checked all of them, and they were all empty. Not picked over. Empty. As if Curtis had never reached for any of them at all. A running man leaves heat. Curtis left cold. And a cold trail, this cold, this fast, doesn't mean a man got away clean. It means there was never a man running in the first place. I went looking for who benefited, which is a homicide detective's question, not a skip tracer's. But the file had stopped being a skip trace file somewhere around that vacant lot, and I knew it even if my client didn't yet. I drove to Phoenix to read the original loan paperwork myself, because I didn't trust a fax with what I was starting to suspect. The boat loan, I discovered, had been arranged almost entirely by Curtis's business partner, a man named Del Brockway, who ran a small marine supply and boat brokerage operation the two of them had started together off a state highway near the lake. Brockway's name was on the application as a reference and as the seller of the very boat the loan was financing. The dealer and the co-arranger of the buyer's credit. Both. The kind of arrangement that should make any lender nervous. The more I pulled, the worse it looked. The boat that secured the loan didn't seem to exist. There was a whole identification number on the paperwork that matched nothing the Coast Guard or the state had a record of. The loan had been taken out in Curtis's name, with Curtis's signature, but the proceeds had flowed into the business, which is to say, into Del Brockway's control. And Curtis had reportedly told two different people in the weeks before he vanished that he'd found something wrong in the company's books and was going to confront his partner. I never proved the killing myself. That's not what a skip tracer is for. But what I handed the sheriff's investigators was this. A man reported as a skip who had no reason and no pattern of a skip. A fraudulent loan taken in his name by the partner who controlled the money. A phantom boat that existed only as collateral on paper. And a family too frightened to say what they suspected. Del Brockway had taken out a loan in a dead man's name, used the skip to explain why Curtis would never be found, and counted on a finance company sending exactly the kind of investigator I was. Someone looking for a deadbeat, not a body. The disappearance of a debtor was the cover story for the murder of a partner who'd looked too closely at the books. The confrontation, when the sheriff's investigators finally put it to Brockway, went the way these things usually go with a man who's had 2 years to believe he got away with it. He'd grown comfortable, kept running the business, kept telling anyone who asked that Curtis had gone to California to chase a woman or a fresh start. Kept the story simple, because simple stories survive. What he hadn't counted on was a finance company caring enough about a defaulted boat loan to send a man who'd spend 3 weeks on it. And he hadn't understood that the very thing he'd built to be airtight, the clean disappearance, the absence of any trail, was itself the thing that gave him away. To someone who'd spent his life reading trails. A guilty man thinks the absence of evidence protects him. Sometimes the absence is the evidence. They found Curtis Lambeth, eventually, in the desert off a road south of the lake his boat was never going to float on.
Buried shallow, the way bodies get buried by men in a hurry who think the desert keeps secrets. It doesn't. Not forever. Del Brockway went to prison for it. I got paid my flat fee for a skip I never repossessed a boat from, because there was no boat. I've taken a lot of skip files since, and most of them are exactly what they look like. Some poor soul running from a debt he couldn't pay. But every so often, one comes across the desk that's too clean, and I've learned to be more suspicious of the tidy disappearance than the messy one. The messy ones are running. The clean ones, sometimes, have been arranged.